Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of DamaniTalks. Today, we're going to have a very good friend of mine, a angel investor, the head of almost a unique, one of the business unit heads of a Sunicon, which is the company that's about to hit $1 billion valuation, and also a family office investor. So we're going to have him joining us very shortly. He's joining in from Singapore, so I hope we'll see him here. Like always, if you guys have any questions while we're in this live Instagram live conversation, please put them in the comment section over here, and I'll be more than happy to ask them of my friend Avik Ashar. And hopefully we'll get into some very interesting points today. We're going to get into conversations about his career. He's got one of those millennial career paths, and he's been across the world. He grew up in the Middle East, and he's been a family office investor. He's worked in a family business, and now he's getting he's been with the Sunicon for almost 3 years, and now he's getting back into the angel game while working for a company that just raised a massive amount of money. So hopefully in all this conversation should make it very interesting for people that are here on a Sunday night, and wouldn't hopefully would put you guys all in bed with a smile on your face and something new to learn. So let me see where my friend is at. Hey Avik, how are ya?
Hey Anirudh, good.
Good. How you doing? What time is it over there?
Good to see. It's currently 11:30.
11:30. And
Yeah,
hopefully you can hear us well.
I can. Can you hear
Cool.
and see me clearly?
Yeah, absolutely. Always good to hear that powerful voice you have, right? And we're gonna get into how that has worked for you. So
Perfect.
guys, like I said, I have my friend Avik joining us from Singapore. Uh, Avik and I have been known each other now coming on 7 years.
Yeah,
And interestingly, we've actually surveyed Bharat as an investment strategy way before any VC actually thought about it.
yeah,
And both of us have had a very interesting journey together and by ourselves. So and hopefully today, with Avik over here, we'll get a chance to go over his journey and teach us a little bit about what it has been for him to work on both sides of the court. He's been a VC, he's been on the family office side, and he's now been working in a startup for almost 3 years, right? And
three and a
he's
half.
seen
Yeah,
3.5, right? And you've seen the
yeah,
startup, like we talked earlier, you've seen the startup grow from 85 people to now 800 plus people,
yeah.
and that in itself is a journey. And the startup we're talking about, by the way, is Zilingo, and we'll talk about what Zilingo does. But Zilingo just raised $226 million in December. It's valued at almost close to $1 billion, and it's
Yeah.
it's led by a very very exciting young entrepreneur, female entrepreneur actually, um, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So Avik, any and obviously Avik, and I think we've already scared you a little bit about the fact that there's going to be this thing called rapid fire at the end. But
Yeah.
before we get there, anything you want to talk about or discuss, and then we'll get into the questions that we've the flow.
Awesome. So I think, Anil, first off, just thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I mean, it's been amazing coming full circle. I think the first time I met you was, about over 7 years ago now. We bumped into each other at a conference.
Yep.
Uh, and since then, it's just been a wonderful partnership, friendship, and just been great knowing you
Yep.
overall.
We've shared drinks in multiple different places, if I'm not wrong.
And got some work done on the side.
Yeah, that's true. So true. So let's talk about that, right? So we met at a
Yeah,
conference. I think you were I was about a year and a half into the VC space. While
yeah,
I think you were just setting up the VC investing side for Hiraco India Ventures,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Interestingly, I was running Artha India Ventures, so we had very similar names starting out. But
yeah.
and I remember that very quickly. I don't know how, but the next memory I have is that we were in Delhi, and we're taking a Shatabdi to Chandigarh, right?
Yeah.
And then and we were, I mean, we were both passed out. It was an early morning train, right?
Yeah.
And we were visiting an amazing accelerator, right? And
Yeah.
something that I hope was still alive today, which was Morpheus, right?
Yeah.
And learned so much about that. So let's talk about that. The first impression, obviously, of visiting Morpheus and your journey ever since.
Yeah, so I still remember. I mean, getting up, and reaching that train was one of the hardest things to do because we had met up for dinner before that, the night before. But once we got there, my first impression, and that was also, I think, traveling the entire country happened a lot with Hiraco, and that was the first time I'd seen Chandigarh, and I was quite
Mm-hmm.
stunned by how planned the city was, how beautiful the infrastructure was, and that's when we got to Morpheus, and I was expecting, at the end of the day, something closer to a corporate building, a lot of glass, metal, and kind of a WeWorky sort of environment.
Yeah.
And instead, it was this small row house, a bunch of people in pajamas sitting in a living room
Yeah.
together, few laptops in the corner, like whiteboards all over the place. And I think my first impression was, are we at the right place?
Yeah, I know, right? And you're like, this is an accelerator? They build
Yeah.
startups here.
But I think that encapsulated some of the beauty of the entire startup journey. That it's not about the flash, it's not about the glitz or the glamour. And I think today more than ever, we've seen a lot of that actually go the wrong way or go south. It's about people is sitting in those kind of wonderful environments, being creative together, looking to solve problems together, and just create and execute rather than worry about everything around that.
Yep. And I think we also appreciated the fact that they had such a simple program, right? And I mean, if people would just Google something called the Morpheus Gang, right? And you'll
Yeah,
see that Morpheus came up with some amazing companies, right? And even their first
absolutely.
fund, I believe, has returned almost 5 times capital, if I'm not wrong. And
Yeah.
it was very difficult to get into fund two. But like I said, they've done. I mean, I think as an accelerator, what do you think about the program? I know you sit in Singapore, so you see
Yeah.
all the amazing accelerators out there. But have you seen something similar to Morpheus?
I mean, considering the plan that they've created and the way they actually described mentoring their companies, and even the kind of feedback Morpheus accelerated companies later shared, people just loved the program. There was an enormous amount of connection, of loyalty, and just pure love for what Morpheus
Yep.
had given them. So, and of course, success always speaks louder than a lot of other things, and they've really created some amazing companies. So it works.
Yeah. And I think we both walked away from that. We were like, what, like, should we create an accelerator? Like, we're like, would it make sense for us?
Yeah.
But then, obviously, we're both setting up family offices. I think, in many ways, you were working with a very clean slate, right? And sort of,
Yeah.
you had the choice to paint the canvas the way you wanted. But
Yeah.
what was it like? You were essentially in convincing a traditional, diamond based family. I mean, a family with generations of building wealth through diamonds, telling them,
Yeah.
let's invest in these tech companies. We don't know when the money is going to come back. We don't know how it's going to get utilized. They're going to burn a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
Which is the diamond guys. The diamond guys doesn't make a lot of sense, right? They're proper danda people, right? They're proper danda,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you're telling them, listen, it's going to do well. And obviously, we'll talk about the portfolio. You have done well, but what was it like? And what was the challenges of setting up such a investment strategy?
So I think it was one of the more interesting things that's ever happened to me in my life, and one of the bigger risks that I've just said yes to. So I started my career off working with DirectEye, which is now part of the Endurance International Group. Today, obviously, now they're a bit like DirectEye is on the map because they were large exits. But at that point in time, the irony was DirectEye was one of the most successful Indian startups, but nobody knew about it because it was bootstrapped. The
Correct.
moment you don't raise money, nobody recognizes it, which is quite funny. But it was an amazing experience working for DirectEye,
Still
and I
true
could
today, by the
definitely
way.
see that. Oh yeah, till today. And I really thought that was a place which I could probably find a home in for a while. And and that's when my very good friends Parth and Kavit had the courage to actually step out of the traditional diamond merchant atmosphere and say, hey, we definitely see that technology is the new play, the new wave, and as diamond merchants are from as diametrically opposite a kind of background, they would probably have missed out on that wave. So they really wanted to actually see what could be done, and I helped them in the early days set up the fund. I think we spent close to 4 months before I actually joined, to a point of time when I realized that this was actually affecting my job. And I walked up to him and said, hey, I think I should pretty much help you find somebody to run this show for you, because you need someone full time. At which point Kavit simply just pulled it out and said, you've set it up. Do you want to run it?
Yeah.
And
And Kavit's just
that
that kind
was
of guy,
one.
right?
Yeah. And I think that was one of the sweetest, and also somebody taking a risk in you. I mean, that was one of the most amazing things I've ever felt, and that's essentially why I had that level of energy and said, hey, you know what? If you're willing to take that risk, I'm willing to take it too, and joined without at the age of 23 and a half, not knowing, having barely any work ex, not really understanding anything. That's essentially when I said, let's try this out and see if I can build a family office together. And that it really went well. I think if you ask me, some of the early times when we actually missed out on startups, and I'm sure you keep one as well, because we've been chatting about some of these, is that little anti-portfolio, the investments
Yeah.
that you missed out on. And one of the ironic ones I remember was Zoomcar.
Yep.
That was one of the first companies we'd seen at GSF in Bangalore, Rajesh Sauni's accelerator, which is pretty amazing. And
And
we
we were there
missed
for the
out on
launch,
it.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we missed out as a family fund on being able to do that investment, because simply, and we were not confident that they wanted to raise money in an investment vehicle in the US. And
Yep.
we were just not comfortable with that. We were like, but why is the money going out? Why? And of course, we were starting off. So I think that was just one of the funnier ways that being more of a traditional family office, there were a couple of roadblocks to actually moving forward. But I think each
Mm.
one of those roadblocks helped us learn more and more about the kind of companies that actually worked. Another interesting thing was, it was very hard for us to jump into companies we didn't understand.
Yep.
Um,
And
and
it's difficult to
frankly,
understand tech, especially,
yeah,
right? But you made some
and
very interesting tech investments like Griddle and things like that.
yeah.
And Farah, I mean, Farah, you wouldn't really call it tech, but yeah, it was a great. These are some amazing investments that have done
Yeah.
well. Right.
So the interesting thing about Farah is, and I think especially now that I'm living in Singapore, I appreciate Farah even more, because in a country like Singapore, every single building is mapped to a pin code.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even your lane, it's not even your street, it's not even your complex. It is your building is mapped to a pin code. If there are two buildings in one society, each building has their own pin code.
Yep.
And a pin code in
Alphanumeric. Yeah.
India and a pin code in India encompasses a huge amount of space. So I could already see that it was really tough for 3PLs and logistics players to even begin to make sense of that, which is why Farai's offering it just made sense.
So the first investment you made, do you remember the name?
Griddle.
Griddle.
It
And
was Griddle.
which is creating apps and a platform for SMEs, right?
Yeah.
What was it like to convince the family office to make that first investment? Do you remember, like,
Their first question was, okay, so how much money are they making? The answer was nothing.
nothing?
Next question was, okay, so what is the projected ROI? I mean, we need to know, are they buying assets? When are we going to break even? The answer was, again, we don't know. So
Yeah,
I
man,
think
those were the
that
days,
that
right? 2013,
and that was one of the defining moments when I actually realized, it takes a lot, and that's when I started respecting everyone in the angel community even more for being able to take that kind of risk and put because mostly angels, it's always it's personal capital, it's personal wealth that you're putting into unproven companies, into untested founders largely, and you're taking a punt essentially on an idea that you believe in and a person that you believe in to a large extent. And it takes an amazing amount of faith, of dedication to stick with that more than just do it or write that check, to actually stick with that company during the hard times, 1 or 2 years down the line when they need advice, support, mentorship, if they need a bridge round, whatever, if their founders, if one of their co-founders has fallen ill and they need support. There's so many things that can go wrong. And it takes a lot to be able to stay with them as partners during that time.
You bring up a very interesting point. Most people don't understand that for angel investors, this is not play money, right? We're giving up something. We could have put the money into bonds, into the listed space. We could have bought a car, right? If I think about all the money we've invested over the last 9.5 years into the space, I mean, there were so many different applications of the money. So we're essentially giving up something, the opportunity cost, that we're saying, okay, we're going to give you the money instead of that person. And whether I'm giving you 5 lakhs or 10 lakhs or 25 lakhs or 25 crore, but eventually that was money that could have been put to some other use. And I feel sometimes that because, on a spreadsheet or on the cap table, all the zeros look alike, right? So it sort of desensitizes you to how much every rupee meant to that person who, like, or family office like yourself, to convince them to say, you know what, you could put this money to buy a diamond, and on that diamond you could make so much money, and you understand that space. But let's test out this guy who's building griddle, who has no idea when he's going to make money, has no idea about what ROI means, right? And in many cases may not even know how to do a proper MIS, right? Or even the double entry accounting system. Most of them don't understand that. But let's give him a chance, right? And I think sometimes I find entrepreneurs don't really understand or appreciate the kind of the things that angel investors like us are giving up, right? Obviously, they're giving up a part of their company, but so are we giving up, money that we could have utilized somewhere else, money that many of us have made by working for hours and hours together. So
Absolutely.
you bring up a very interesting point. Any exits so far in the portfolio?
So we've had a couple of exit opportunities, but the simple call of the family was to stay in the companies, because and in fact I'd say so we still have regular monthly catch-ups on the portfolio, and I think one of the biggest regrets we've probably had, but again, it's hindsight, but is not whether we should have taken the exits, it's whether we should have actually doubled down and taken our pro rata in some of the rounds. Which we did. So that's actually it's really interesting.
So actually,
I still remember.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I mean, I still remember the first day we realized we had our first shutdown.
We had the first. Let's talk about that one.
It was a company based out of registered based out of Singapore, but operating across India. It's called eHelium, and I honestly felt bad about the entire for the founders, because they put everything into it. It was basically they used to sell courses via universities to students, so that who could actually increase their vocational skills. So they'd sell a lot of soft skill courses to students. And I really thought that it made a lot of sense. Invested with a couple of good angels who are today, till date, very, very close friends of mine. And we supported the company throughout. But that's one of those interesting things where people underestimate how tough it is to get money out of colleges, to actually appreciate cash flow. And this goes back to something that you were talking about earlier, the traditional metrics of accounting, of managing cash flows. These are things that sometimes startups forget. And it's very easy to say, hey, I booked 3 crores of sales for the next 6 months. But when are you going to realize that money, and can you keep your lights on?
The difference between booked revenue and banked revenue are two different things, right? There's a huge difference.
So it was really hard, because we supported the company. We actually stepped in with one bridge, and we hoped for it to actually turn around. But again, we saw that sadly they didn't learn from the first mistake, and it went to the same kind of gap between booked and banked caught up again. And at that point of time, as an angel, I think that was the hardest call to possibly take, to say we will not bridge.
Yeah, because you can only give so many bridges, right? I think at some point the company needs to start performing, right? And I think especially Edtech, because I've had a couple of failures in Edtech too. And I think many people don't understand that a lot of these colleges are not profit-making entities, and they do not sit. It's not like the US, right, where they sit on a lot of money that has been donated, or that. So I mean, where there's billions of dollars that will pay for the
large funds, yeah.
Yeah, but unlike India, where most of the time they're literally living off the government or of benefactors, and a lot of the time they don't have the budget to go after some of these new stuff, these new verticals coming up, and therefore they slow pay, and then you might have a contract this year, but then you got to go back and resell the entire board again next year to continue. And I think it's unfortunately, you just can't copy paste what was there in the US and bring it here. So yeah, wow. And what was there any backlash to that write off, or did you? What was the biggest thing you learned about the next time you looked at an Edtech investment?
I think the hardest thing and the biggest thing I learned, and honestly, I think every investment teaches you something new, is to actually talk a lot more to founders, to understand, hey, is this something that makes sense to you? Can we coach you? Can we coach you more on it? Can we support you to a point where I remember in the last few months of Helium, and I think we did this too little, too late. We actually one of the angels was sweet enough to actually send one of his finance team members from his own family business into their office to sit with them and do their accounts and actually tighten the books. And had we done that, say maybe 12 months prior, it could have been a very, very different story. So again, it comes down to being able to support and empathize.
Putting in the time after the investment, right? Because it's unfortunately not just passive check writing. Good. So, I think that brings me to a very interesting part of today's discussion, which let's discuss your career, right? Like you said, you grew up in Oman, right? You went to Jai Hind College. And then after that, you joined Hiraco, right?
Yeah.
Was that a planned decision that, because, you could have, with your background, gone back to Oman. I know your family has very deep connects and has been there for decades over there. Got a nice, cushy job in a bank, right? And days would have been, get home at 5 or 6 or whatever, and then and all the vacation time you needed.
It's a comfy life.
Right? Nice comfy life. Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And the Omani, the Omani dinar is obviously 100 rupees for one, right? So
170, yeah, 170 about.
Wow.
Oh God, it's a beautiful.
So nice exchange
no
rate,
taxes,
right?
No taxes, beautiful exchange rate.
And
Fairly good life.
You decided that I'm going to join and set up a family office, a word that wasn't even talked about back then. And I am going to travel the country in trains, planes, and automobiles like we did. And I'm going to do this thing in VC, right? Was that a planned decision, or was that a, let's see kind of decision where it takes us?
To be super honest, I actually was completely on board for the cushy life. I had, from the time I grew up, I was like, I love Muscat. This is all I ever want to know, all I ever want to see. And that's it. At that point in time, my parents kind of noticed that I was becoming too comfortable, and comfort is the death of ambition and experimentation to a certain extent. So they decided to send me to boarding school in India, which opened my eyes, because boarding is a different experience. It's amazing. There were horsewhips involved if you don't run fast enough on on your morning jogs. But yeah, it really whipped us into shape, quite literally. Right after that, I was pretty much ready to go straight back to Oman, back to the cushy life that I had pretty much dreamed of as a child, and said, this is what I'm going to do. But that's when my friends, one of them being Parth, who I later ended up setting up a fund with, suggested stay in Bombay with us for a couple of weeks. And I just dialed to a small anecdote about Bombay, because this kind of cemented both how crazy Bombay is versus a Muscat life, and why I wanted to be there. After nearly 2 weeks of my friends ferrying me around in their own cars with their drivers, and bless them that they did that. I was like, you know what? I want to spend a day at least really living Bombay life. So I proceeded, and for the Mumbai audience, I proceeded to get into a train from Churchgate Station at 6
Wow.
p.m. in the evening in a Virar
Oh
fast
man.
in the
Okay.
general compartment, trying to get off
Without
at
a ticket?
Bandra, which is. Luckily, I had a ticket. I actually bought the first
Okay.
class ticket and didn't know which one first class was. So I went
The,
into the
the full Mumbai
the normal.
experience also means you get in without the ticket, right?
I was too scared. I was raised too much like a Muscat boy at that point in time. So I proceeded to get into that train, thinking, hey, it's not too crowded because that was Churchgate Station. It was okay. As the train progressed and as we, I think, crossed Dadar, I kind of understood that this was the worst possible decision I'd ever made. Oman is a country of 3 million people. At that point, I personally felt that there were 3 million people around me in that train.
Yeah.
And I was going to die. Um, I missed my stop, and I then proceeded to go nearly 1 hour ahead of my stop, reaching Borivali.
Wow.
At which point, and I'm not ashamed to say this because I was scared. At this point, I was in tears, and people felt bad for me, so they managed to get me to the door and threw me onto the platform. I ran out, found the nearest westernized site which I could, which was McDonald's, sat there, called my friends, and said, "Send a driver, pick me up. I'm not leaving. I'm not going to get out of this place." But once I got over that, I kind of realized that this city, the kind of adventures and the kind of insanity you can have versus going back to a city of, say, 800,000 people where you
Yep.
know close to 100,000 of them, uh, I don't want that.
Yep.
I want to figure out what this crazy life in Mumbai can actually offer. So I stayed. And
And crazy you
it's
did,
history.
right? Because I remember this 3 or 4 years when we were active as investors, right? And you joined IAN. You part of Mumbai Angels also for a bit. I think you also joined
Yeah.
Venture Nursery while it
Let's
was still there.
venture nursery.
Let's
We
Venture.
did an investment with venture nursery as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
then
it was
in 2017, Avik suddenly disappeared, right? But in between, he did a very interesting gig. So Avik, as you can see, has a amazingly heavy voice, right? And it's a lot of women, I believe, find it very sexy. I believe you were a voiceover artist,
it
and
works. Yeah.
so let's talk about that a little bit, right? It puts you, yeah.
Yeah.
So
It,
how did you get those gigs, and what was it all about?
it was the strangest thing. At one point, a friend of mine was with the Xavier Institute of Communication, and she mentioned that some of her friends were looking for a voiceover artist. And at that point of time, I mean, it was college time. Frankly, in Indian college, you do everything else except attend college almost.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is one of those things I want to add to. Let's do it. And I jumped up, and I went for the voiceover, and I wasn't expecting anything. Frankly, I just thought I was doing this as a favor to a friend. At the end of it, at the end of the voiceover, and they said, "Hey, can we?" This really pretty girl walks up and says, "Hey, can we? Like, what's your rate? We didn't discuss this beforehand. I'm so sorry." At which point, I just said, "Drink with you." That's pretty much it.
Oh wow.
And I mean that worked out well. But since since then, I've
The
done
drink or the career? Which one worked out well?
both. But I, but since then, I really enjoyed doing the voiceover. I just thought this is something that it's a lot of fun and something that you can do on the side. And honestly, even at that point in time, I was thinking somewhat practically in terms of diversified streams of income, and obviously all of that didn't mean much to a college student, but it was just like I need to earn money somehow.
Yep.
So I just started doing it, and from there it became something that I actually enjoyed, to a point where there were times when, depending on the voiceover, I wouldn't charge. I'd charge a subsidized rate, and just go ahead and do it because it was fun.
Have any of your startups ever taken you as a voiceover artist?
No, they really should probably, but
Yeah. Do they know? Do they know, right? That they could get a really amazing voiceover artist with the investment, right?
yeah.
No. So are you still doing that?
Mhm. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to really catch up with it in Singapore over the last 2 years. But a very close friend of mine is actually actually runs a sound production or a music production studio over here. So I've done a few
Okay.
tracks pro bono for him, and we're looking to actually kick that up again over the
Oh
next few
wow.
months.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Good. So
so that's fun.
I would love to hear some more of that. But any I guess any voiceover that was wildly popular that most people would have heard.
I think the most popular and commercial one I've ever done was a Quick Heal antivirus voiceover.
So, what was
That
the punchline that you said? Do you remember?
unfortunately I don't. The funniest part was
Okay.
it was in Hindi, and my Hindi is still pretty bad. So they pretty much had to coach me off a script 10 times, get me to nail the pronunciation right, and then try and get a take.
So then in 17, right, you I think you moved into more of an advisory role with Hiraco, and
Yeah,
you moved over to Singapore, and you joined a relatively unknown startup at the time called Zilingo. So the
absolutely.
first question, what made you decide to move? Did you go to Singapore first or Bangkok first?
Actually, so when I first applied, it was because I was enjoying the investing space. But one of the things that I definitely realized, and this is something uh, countless fund managers and larger angels had told me across my time in investing, is that you need to get your hands dirty. At some point, you need to get your hands dirty, and you really need to see the startup side of it. Otherwise, in their opinion, and frankly, I concur today, to a certain extent, you can't really appreciate every piece of running a startup or investing in a startup. So that's when I actually started looking actively to join an early stage startup, to understand what that journey is like, to actually start executing at that level, to kind of know what it feels like to be building something from scratch without any safety net of an institution around you, without any
Yeah.
rules, without guidelines, without anything really telling you what to do. You're pretty much in blank space and you need to figure it out. And that at that point in time, it was really amazing because I knew the founding team of Zilingo from Bombay, and I reached out. My CV went into the system, and somebody reached back. Somebody reached out back and said, "Hey, we'd love to do an interview." I still remember that. I was on my balcony in Bombay because my house was extremely noisy, and like frankly, asking my grandparents to switch their evening TV time off is just not done. So I stepped out, and we had the interview. It sounded great, but at the end of it, the question that stumped me was, okay, fine, fair enough. Think we can make this. Think we can make this work. Look, sounds good. So, are you open to moving to Bangkok? And
And
that's
you're like,
that.
when do I fly?
No, I mean, so at that point, actually, it was quite interesting because I was and am still in a very serious relationship with a lovely, lovely woman who's currently living in India, and we've pretty much she's got the patience of an angel to have kept up a 3.5 year long distance with me, or even put up with me for that long. But it was a pretty big question at that point in time. That do I want to pretty much I've already uprooted myself once. I've
Hmm.
left behind everything I knew, the entire comfortable life that I knew, which I had in Muscat. I left something that I was fairly set on, uh, and moved to India, which was already a pretty big leap. And I think the biggest question in my head at that point in time was, can I do it again?
Hmm. And that too in a
So it
country
was.
now where it's a language you can't understand. You can't, even the written one doesn't make
A,
any sense, right?
a language you don't know, a place you've never been to. I mean, funnily enough, I'd never been to Bangkok till then. A place you've never been to, a culture that's completely different, a startup which is a completely different ecosystem from what I was used to. Basically, just upending my life again. And it took some time. I frankly had to on that first call say, I need some time to think about it. But the more I thought about it, and the more I spoke to my girlfriend, my friends, my family, the only thing I could think of was, I need to do this now. At this point,
Yep.
now I just need to do this.
It
because
just felt right.
yeah, it felt right. And the most amazing thing was that I was called down for 3 days to even like to meet the team and to even get that level of comfort and see whether I did feel like I want to be part of this journey. And I think that was what was the real clincher. And that was, I think, an amazing, amazing move because that made me feel like I'm already part of this family and I already want to be
So they flew you
on
to
this journey.
Singapore to come
To
hang out with
Bangkok,
them. To Bangkok
to Bangkok. Yeah,
come hang out with the team.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I mean, if then there's a bunch of entrepreneurs that I know that are watching this right now. If they want to get someone with your level of talent and your level of experience, I guess would you say that having that time to go and spend with the team, and that the founders really wanted to see whether you were a fit, was that one of the key reasons why you joined?
That was probably the key reason.
Okay, so it's an
Yeah.
important one for everyone to remember, right? Like it's many times we interview people, especially in this COVID era, we're interviewing them, and we never have them actually meet the team, and they
Yeah.
even join this and they get oriented, but then we've never actually tested them whether they actually work in our ecosystem, right?
Yeah. I
And
think the
it's
most amazing part of that was it wasn't just a meeting. It's a lot of people fly people down for even an hour-long interview and then get them a cup of coffee. Thank you very much. Bye. It was 3 days to actually
wow.
sit in the office, to immerse, to feel like I'm part of that office, and just be there. And that really, really changes what you feel and what you think.
Perspective, yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
No, it's so
Yeah,
true. So true, actually.
yeah.
Um,
I think Shravan's got a question. What was the
yeah.
hardest part about making the move to Bangkok?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I don't know where to start. Uh, Frankly, Shravan, it was everything. So I've luckily had the privilege of living at home, apart from boarding, always living at home, always living with family. So whether it was in Oman with my parents, whether it was in India with my grandparents, I've always had that wonderful and like lovely experience of being at home. And this would be the first time in my life I had to move out and set up my own home, run my own home. I didn't know the first thing about doing laundry, folding clothes, or mopping a house until until Bangkok happened. So, uh, I mean, that was the craziest part.
But what I like about the Thai culture is so accepting. I think it's obviously Buddhism is one of the primary religion over there. And
Yeah,
I've stayed in Koh Samui, and I've been back to Bangkok at least 7 to 10 times in the last decade, and I've always found the culture to be extremely peaceful, right? And very very accepting. These days even you go to some of the markets in Bangkok, they speak in Hindi, right? Or at least they'll catcall you in Hindi
yeah,
to come buy stuff. So
yeah,
uh, very very interesting cultures. And now then obviously
yeah,
you've then moved back now to Singapore. We've been there for 2 years. What's it
yeah.
been like? What like your current position is head of B2B
Of
for
EMEA,
procurement
of
of
EMEA,
MES,
which is
MEA,
yeah, yeah, which
MEA
is Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
and Africa. Okay, so let's talk about Zilingo. What does Zilingo do? People that are joining in, people that are listening in, uh, what does Zilingo do, right? And what does Avik do for Zilingo?
Wonderful. So I think it'd be more interesting to chat about a little bit about the Zlingo journey. We essentially started off with a very simple mission, and it's pretty much been the same one that's continued today. It's to democratize the supply chain, focusing on fashion. And it started off when our founders, Ankiti and Dhruv, made a visit to the Chatuchak market in Bangkok and actually saw these amazing selection of sellers, of people who have, and for anyone who's been to Bangkok and been to any of the night markets, they have wonderful, wonderful products. A lot of them made in their homes, made in these small little houses where they just have sewing machines and they're just creating their products. A lot of them are doing it themselves. And making these products, they're really great quality, they're very innovative, but they never had access or a way to be able to sell these products to the world. So that's the early stage of the Zilingo platform, which was essentially at that point in time a B2C interface, allowing these merchants to bring their products onto the platform, to actually manage their inventory through the platform, to track how much they're buying and selling via the platform, and of course, to be able to sell to end consumers via the Zilingo Trade platform. And that's essentially where it started. And from that point of time, we've grown extensively. Some of it has been covered heavily by the media. Some of the more interesting things haven't really been touched upon, which people don't know, is that while, of course, there's a huge commerce business, which now allows merchants across India and Indonesia and the Philippines to be able to sell largely fashion products. So everything from, say, the yarn that goes into a garment to the buttons to the trims and the fabric. There's also an amazingly large services business. So essentially, that's the kind of split: the commerce platform, which is what most people know, and the services business, which is actually a really strong backbone as well, which started off in the later part of 2018, early 2019, when we realized that we were interacting with so many manufacturers in the supply chain, but they had absolutely no technology. I think the first time I visited large factories across Bangladesh and Jakarta and Indonesia, and I've spent a lot of time in Bangladesh. I love it. We can get to that, but I realized that there are factories that are manufacturing for Mango, for Tommy Hilfiger, for Zara, for H&M, and their idea of technology is whiteboards on which they write out their daily production. When we literally asked them, some of the first few factory owners, what's the technology you use? They pointed at one guy sitting in the corner of the entire factory with an old PC, probably running Windows 98 with Excel.
Well,
and that,
at least not Windows
yeah.
96, right?
And that was the extent of technology. Of course, there are larger factories that have a large amount of technology, but that's relegated to the very, very few at the top of the entire ecosystem. The majority do not have access to technology, and frankly,
because they also don't have a lot of the demand, I guess, or the kind of revenue they need to afford this kind of stuff.
The interesting thing is that they have revenue, but and this is one of the first things that we realized is that a lot of the technology out there isn't geared to them. There are some of these factories that we encountered that are pretty large players doing anywhere between 25 to 50 million annual sales, 15% EBITDA. That's fairly solid cash flow to be able to afford the beginnings of enterprise technology. Some of them had even actually spent the money, which was for them actually more scary than an angel investor writing a 3 crore check up front, where they actually started getting an SAP to come in and try to improve their systems. But the hardest part was these systems aren't built for the average factory worker who's maybe at the most secondary school educated, if not primary school educated. They're meant for white collar workers who are used to being in an office, not people who work in a factory. So none of this technology was geared for them. It was not geared for the factory workers. I think that was one of the hardest things to wrap our heads around and understand. And once we figured that piece out, that's when we realized this needs to be app first. This needs to be color coded. It needs to be as simple as green, blue, red, yellow, and can be operated by essentially anybody with minimal levels of training, with minimal levels of explanation, and has to mimic their existing processes as closely as possible.
Such a key thing for any entrepreneur out there, right? Building complex ERPs or complex systems for basically, people that tell me that they're building something for blue-collar workers, but they've actually never put the device or put their app or put their service in the hands of a blue-collared person, right? This is something they need to understand, right? You have to build it for them. So you got to get down and dirty, get down to the last guy who's going to use it and start building that app for them. I mean, I've had very similar questions even with the CTO of PharmEasy, right? That they didn't realize who are the major users of their app, because people kept buying Croson until they figured out that the person who really needed their app was the guy who had a chronic illness, right? Like cancer or diabetes. and then they had to build the app really for that person and not the guy trying to buy grocery. So
Yeah.
very, very profound learning actually. So then
Yeah.
you've been so now so if somebody's over here, they they have a fashion startup or they have a fashion store or they sell something, they're an influencer on Instagram or something like that. What can Zilingo do for them?
Sure. So some of the more interesting ways, and essentially I'm just going to break this up into commerce and services. Uh, Anyone in any of the countries where we operate, which are namely at this point India, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines. These are our primary markets where we operate our commerce division. Can register on Zilingo, on Zilingo Trade. We can and On Zlingo Trade, and they can create their store. They can register as a seller, put their products up, and essentially it's an almost seamless onboarding process. And within 2 days, within 2 to 3 days, they can start selling on Zilingo with a fully fledged live store, and they'll be able to sell to other businesses, which is the amazing part. They'll be able to sell their products to businesses and small retailers spread across our different markets. And the second piece that they can definitely take advantage of is our services side. So our services side is basically split into SaaS, which is software as a service, which is more driven towards manufacturers. So if you're a garment manufacturer and you're looking to optimize your factory, reduce your rejections by 50%, by the way, which is frankly nuts, then you should definitely hit up our software team. And the other key thing that we have is marketing as a service. So we essentially help a lot, and we essentially have built an amazing team across the last 5 years to be able to market our own platform, to market our products. While we were heavily B2C focused company, we had an amazing marketing team, and we've essentially productized that to allow any brands and stores and budding entrepreneurs across the world, in fact, because the marketing services is not limited by geography. So any upcoming brands and entrepreneurs across the world, whether you have your own retail store, whether you're somebody who's just looking to start and become an influencer on Instagram and sell products, whether you're a designer, whoever you are, you can reach out and we have a solution that can work.
Wonderful. So guys, I think if you're in the fashion space and you're looking to go one leg up on your competition, the person to reach out to for EMEA, right, is Avik, and do check out Zilingo.com. I believe there's something also known as the Asia Mall that you can also check out.
Yeah, Zilingo Asia Mall, correct.
Yeah. So Avik, before we move on to the rapid fire, I've got a few more things to ask you. So you've now been a VC, and you've also now been a part of an early stage company. What advice do you think that you gave as a VC, right? And now when you're looking at the other side, you're like, maybe not as articulate as I thought it was.
Yeah. So I think the thing is, as a VC, it was always, you just can't understand the sheer level of grit and effort that and the passion that startup founders feel for their startups, because in most cases, typically, and especially in ours, and in most startups I've seen, startup founders have given up that same cushy and comfy path where they can work where they can work with a BCG, McKinsey, Sequoia, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, continue on very cushy paths. It's a great career path, great trajectory. Do your MBA, go back to one of the same firms I just mentioned. By 35, have a good house and car. By 45, be able to write a few angel checks. By 50, you can actually cash out and do whatever you want. But that is that literal cushy path that's out there for most professionals if you follow that. But I think that the thing I never appreciated is the level of passion and the courage that it takes to be able to look at that life and consciously walk away from it towards the absolute unknown, and just say, hell, I'm going to try. because I think that there's something that needs to be built here. I think that's something that I never fully appreciated when I was on the VC side until I saw the passion in startups.
And obviously, you're writing checks again now, right? As an angel, right?
Yeah.
And do you see a different perspective when you look at an entrepreneur today than maybe what you looked at them in maybe 2016? Like, is your lens a little bit different? Is it sharper? Is it what are you looking for now?
Very, very, very. So I think from the time I started in Hiraco, when we were essentially experimenting and trying to a point where we actually refined our thesis, understood the kind of companies that we could lend most value to and we felt would be the best for our portfolio. Today as an angel, I think the first check I wrote was the easiest. I won't go into details about the company because they're still in that space where they want to go under the radar. But
Stealth mode.
stealth mode. But it was a company I encountered solving a particular problem I'd noticed with factory workers. And this is a problem that I noticed in glaring detail when I'd seen factories across Asia. And the moment the founders started even trying to pitch, and when he opened his pitch and he was going into details about this is what we're trying to do, and he was dumbing it down. It's like, wait, you don't need to dumb it down. First, I understand what you're talking about. I actually understand what you're talking about. Tell me, how did you solve this? And then I saw the excitement light up on the founder's face, because there's finally someone on that same exact wavelength who knows this is the problem that he's seen and this is what his fix is. And then that just went rolling, where it was the fastest decision I'd ever made. I was just catching up for a cup of coffee, and it morphed into me asking him to let me write a check. And in fact, he had to go back because the round was a rather large one, and my check was fairly small. And he in fact had to go back, talk to his existing investors, his co-founders, and literally put up a fight and say, "No, I want this check."
And I think for any investor listening out there, right, it's so important sometimes to get down to the founder's level and then talk at their level, so they can understand that you understand what they're going through. You may not have been in the same business, but you definitely understand. And so now let's get into the rapid fire. I've got a few more questions, but I think that Avik is just so exciting talking to you, right? I think we could go on for another hour, but unfortunately, Instagram shuts you off exactly at 1 hour, and we've got about 9 minutes to go.
So let's jump into the rapid fire. Yes.
And hopefully, if we both make it out on the other side of live, then we'll get to a couple more questions, right? So are you ready? You want to do a little bit of stretches, right? So good. There we go. So simple format. I'm going to ask you a question. First thing that comes to mind, just spit it out, right? And then we'll probably get into deeper details if required. All right. So here we go. What do you know now that you wish you would have known earlier?
Where to invest.
Where to invest. Okay. Biggest advice to founders about fundraising?
It takes 3 times as long as you think it will. Always.
That's a good one. It's so true. Okay. One thing that every person looking for a VC job should have as a skill.
In my honest opinion, startup experience.
Real startup experience. Working in a company. Working in a startup.
I believe that very strongly today.
And we're not talking about Geo or Oyo being a startup. We're talking about a real first 50 employee kind of an experience, right?
Yeah.
One thing that they should avoid.
VCs should avoid.
If you're looking for a job in VC, like what you should avoid as before you join a VC.
Believing Excel.
Yeah, I was gonna say banking experience, but yeah, I guess believing Excel is good too. One piece of advice that sounded very good when you heard it, but was extremely bad after implementing it. And it could be on anything. It could be a career. It could be as an investor, as working in Zilingo.
Huh. That's an interesting one. I frankly, can't even, nothing even comes to mind on that one. Sorry, Anirudh.
Because you've always been getting good advice. That's what it means.
Yeah.
3 things that would make you run away from an angel investment.
Run away. The first thing is when the person who's making it doesn't have any clue about what the company actually does. If they're just jumping into it to make it to feel flashy and just to do that angel investment, that's a very, very scary sign. When the investor doesn't understand the cap table, dilution, essentially someone who doesn't really understand investments, because I've seen a lot of deals go sour where where people who wrote checks in the early stage just didn't understand that. And the third one, honestly, just it's a lot. There is something down to the gut. If your gut says don't take that or don't do it, I've realized that whenever I've not trusted my gut, it's not really gone well.
Yeah, if it sounded too good to be true, it definitely was. Again, and I think we touched upon this, but if an investor can provide one value to a startup besides the money, what should it be?
They need complementary skill sets.
So work on the areas of weakness, I guess.
So I can literally jump in with an example again for that stealth startup. The founder was one of the worst salespeople I've ever met, and he was the head of sales. He was at that point leading sales for them.
CEO, right?
The worst salesperson I've met, and no, actually, I met the founder who I had met was the COO, not the CEO. But he was the person who actually led their sales. The CEO led the more technical pieces, which is what scared me, because I was like, honestly, if I didn't understand this space, I would have asked you to leave. I would have just walked out of this meeting in 15 minutes, because you did not get to the meat of how big the problem is and how well you are solving it.
Good. So I think
experience. Yeah.
So I've got the gong from Instagram. We've got 1 minute left. Good. I'm going to ask you one thing you would like to change about the Mumbai startup ecosystem, and you can't say trains.
Stop copy pasting. Don't like build unique. Build things that India needs, not something that can probably be funded and acquired and sold. Build for real problems that you see.
I mean, that's a great one, and I think unfortunately, while we have very little time left, but thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, Avik, as always, right? And hopefully,
it's awesome,
once this lockdown thing is over, we would love to host you again, and possibly talk about all the amazing things you're doing over there at Zilingo. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Wonderful.
And
all right.
We'll stay in touch. Bye.
Thanks, Anirudh. Thanks, everyone. Bye.